If there's one thing that the Godzilla franchise is famous for, is its numerous catalogue of films. At the time of recording this video, there are 36 different Godzilla films, each of them with their own different versions of the character, different divergent timelines, sequels to different films, reboots, prequels, that sort of thing. So to a new fan, it can be quite intimidating to get into the franchise. So where do you begin exactly with a franchise with this kind of a legacy? And with this video, I aim to try and get the average person into the Godzilla franchise, not just the MonsterVerse films. Don't get me wrong, they're a fantastic place to start for a new fan. That's where I started myself. However, in my opinion, they give you a very surface level look at the franchise, which goes way deeper than just the 4 MonsterVerse films and their numerous spin-off books and novels. So allow me to try and wean you onto the Japanese films by giving you a brief overview about the different series of the films, which films are important, which ones to skip, and to hopefully get you interested enough to check them out for yourself. This is my definitive guide for the Godzilla franchise. I think the best place to start with a video like this is explaining the different eras of Godzilla films. Unlike other franchises such as the MCU or DC, the Godzilla franchise isn't one coherent timeline. Instead, it's numerous separate timelines which have similar characters, theming, iconography, but are completely different from each other. The fanbase has categorized each and every film into 4 or 5 distinct different eras depending on who you asked. The 4 eras that everyone agrees on are the Showa era, which ran from 1954 to 1975, the Heisei era, which ran from 1984 to 1995, the Millennium era, which ran from 1999 to 2004, and the Reiwa era, which is the current era of the franchise, which is running from 2016 into the current day. Some fans, including myself, want to put the MonsterVerse films into the Reiwa era, however, most fans commonly put these films in a different subsection along with Godzilla 1998. Now, before I actually start getting into the actual films themselves and the eras, I think it's important I get the whole sub versus dub argument out of the way. Now, for those of you with a life and who aren't committed to being terminally online or aren't a weeb, sub and dub is the argument of how you should watch a Japanese or foreign piece of media. Either is it translated for you with the voice acting completely different, or should it just be subtitles but the original actual spoken dialogue is intact, but there's text at the bottom to let you know what they're saying. Personally, I'm on the side of being on the dub side. Like, it's a film or TV show, I don't want to read, I actually want to watch, so I don't really mind if the voice acting is a bit crude, so long as I know what's happening in the plot. And with a Godzilla film, it's doubly less important because you're there for the monsters, you're not there for the boring humans. Confused yet? Yeah, I'd imagine so. So I'm going to give you a brief rundown of each different era so you can get a brief grasp about what they're all about and what films to check out from each era. Right, let's start where it all began, the Showa era. This is the longest era of Godzilla films, which ran from 1950 to 1975. This era consists of 15 different films. Each of them are loosely connected to each other, sometimes. So I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of each of the films so you know what to expect. Godzilla 1954 was the first one. Raids Again is the sequel to the original film where Godzilla meets Anguirus, who at first is his rival but then becomes his most trusted ally. King Kong vs Godzilla. This film features a crossover between Godzilla and King Kong. The two monsters face off in a climactic battle. Mothra vs Godzilla. Mothra first meets Godzilla in this film, however she has her own film called Mothra which is connected to this film. Ghidorah the three-headed monster is the introduction of King Ghidorah, Godzilla's most famous rival, and is considered to be the Joker to his Batman. Invasion of Astro Monster, a movie where Godzilla and Rodan are taken into space to fight Ghidorah. Ibra Horror of the Deep, Godzilla fights a giant lobster monster. Son of Godzilla, the introduction of Minilla, Godzilla's son, Destroyer Monsters, the first finale of Godzilla, where Godzilla and the other Earth monsters team up against King Ghidorah. All monsters attack. A dream film where a young boy dreams about Minilla and to find his own self-esteem. Godzilla vs Hedorah, the introduction of Hedorah, a polluted monster who is from outer space who feeds off pollution. Godzilla vs Gigan, the introduction of the cyborg monster Gigan. Godzilla vs Megalon, the most goofy Godzilla film, where the character of Megalon and Jaguar are introduced. Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla, the introduction of the robotic monster Mechagodzilla, Godzilla's second most iconic foe. Terror of Mechagodzilla, the sequel to that film. And as I alluded to earlier, This era of Godzilla films also contains several spin-off films such as Mothra, Rodan, War of the Gargantuas, and other films, which aren't not necessary viewing, but if you're morbidly curious, check them out, but again, not required. So what films from this era are considered to be important or the good shit? Well, it really depends who you ask, but I'll give you the brief rundown of which films are the ones that you should be watching from this era. Now, what am I going to class as an important film? Well, I'm going to class the important films as the ones which introduce the biggest aspects of the franchise, namely important monsters going forward, key themes, characters, or films I just personally think are an entertaining watch. So here's the brief rundown. Should kind of go without saying, but I think the most important film from this era is the first one. It's the start of the franchise, so I definitely think if you're getting into the franchise, it is a must watch. I don't think it should be anyone's first Godzilla film. I definitely think one of the American films or the MonsterVerse films should be a better place for you to start. However, this is a good place to start if you're wanting to get into the Japanese films, but it's not, in my opinion, it hasn't aged well to modern audiences. The film being in black and white is a major factor why some people won't watch it, and some of the dated special effects, while extremely charming to me, to other people they may put them off just a tiny bit. And that's another thing with the Showa era, it's dated the most in terms of its special effects. They look crude and kind of crap to a modern audience, but if you're getting into these films, I definitely think it is something that you have to kind of look past. And in my opinion, it's sort of similar to theatre, where obviously the things that a theatre play is displaying aren't true to reality, however it's supposed to be giving you an idea of what you're seeing. I view the Showa era as being quite similar. It's supposed to kind of change your perception just a tiny bit to see what the filmmaker is trying to get you to watch, rather than just taking it at face value. The later films in the franchise fix this issue and are a lot more believable in terms of special effects. Anyway, let's get back to the actual important films. I think the next important film is King Kong vs Godzilla. Now, this is one of the films I really like. It's one of my personal favourites of the entire series because of its fun action, goofy characters, and it's a brisk watch. It's quite short, entertaining, action-packed, and it's everything I love about the Showa era. Cheesy fun, with guys in suits beating the crap out of each other. It's also a nice kind of like template for the perfect Godzilla film in my opinion. A great balance of human and monsters who don't exactly clash together, if that makes sense, in terms of the humans take away from the screen time, rather they both enhance each other and make each other more entertaining. The next film I'd say is definitely required viewing if you want to get into the franchise is Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. This is the film where Godzilla meets King Ghidorah, which is a pretty significant part of the franchise. He's Godzilla's biggest foe and is one that keeps turning up time and time again, and this film acts as a great introduction to him, so it's definitely a good place to start if you're only familiar with his MonsterVerse counterpart. Also, this is the first Godzilla film where he interacts with Rodan, so it's definitely a good place to start if you want to know who Rodan is. Although he's not as important as the other big five, which is Toho's most popular monsters, he's a big player in the franchise and is one which is a fan favourite. Alright, first controversial pick of the video. I think Godzilla vs Megalon is required viewing if you want to get into the Showa era. Now, a lot of fans consider this film to be quite bad, however I think it's the perfect place to see exactly what I love about the Showa era, the complete and utter cheesiness of the era and the leaps in logic you have to make while watching these films. It's corny, it's cheesy, it's low production, and it's everything I love from this franchise, at least from the very niche perspective that I sometimes view these films at. I'll always take a more grounded and serious Godzilla film any day over versus Megalon, but I also think it's a fantastic example of everything that the Showa era can offer you. The last film that I think is required viewing from the Showa era is definitely Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla. It's the film which introduced Mechagodzilla, who is the second most important monster villain in the franchise in my opinion, so it's a good watch to know what he's all about, and it's a really good film as well for a Godzilla Showa film. It's again what I want to see in a Godzilla film: fun action, interesting sets, locations, unique monsters, so it's a good example of what the franchise can offer. Although the Showa era is definitely the most important era of the Godzilla franchise due to it being the beginning of the series and introducing so many of the core monsters and iconography, I do think other eras improve upon it and are more watchable. So let's take a look at the Heisei era, in my opinion the most approachable era of Godzilla. The Heisei era ran from 1984 to 1995 and marked a significant change in the characterization of Godzilla and the entire franchise as a whole. This era aimed to make the franchise more serious with a darker tone compared to the Showa era. It featured improved special effects, a more complex storyline with each film building upon what the previous one did, and explored more themes such as environmentalism, scientific advancement, and the consequences of nuclear power. It's a reason why the franchise is able to stay alive in the modern day due to the fact that it shows that the franchise could evolve past the silly Showa era. So now I'll give a brief rundown about what the era has in store. The Return of Godzilla is how this era officially starts. This film serves as being a direct sequel to the original 1954 film, disregarding the events of the Showa era. It reintroduces Godzilla as a destructive force of nature reawakened by nuclear weapons. The movie depicts Godzilla and its rampage through Tokyo whilst the government tried to stop it. Godzilla vs. Biollante came out in 1989 and shows Godzilla battling against a genetically engineered Biollante, with themes of bioengineering and genetic manipulation being explored. In 1991, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah releases. The movie has a complicated time travel storyline which not a lot of fans even understand to this day, due largely in part due to a poor translation and being quite convoluted even from the get-go. The next film that is in this era is Godzilla vs. Mothra, not to be confused with the Showa era's Mothra vs. Godzilla. In this film, Mothra teams up with another moth-like creature called Batra to fight Godzilla. Up next is Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. It's not a sequel to the Showa era's Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, rather it's the reintroduction of Mechagodzilla in this era. This film shows Mechagodzilla being built by humans that have come from outer space. He's built from the future technology harvested from Mecha King Ghidorah, who was introduced in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. This film also shows a team up between Rodan and Godzilla as they fight Mechagodzilla and is the introduction of Godzilla's spiral heat ray. This film also reintroduces the son of Godzilla as Baby Godzilla, a less creepy version of the character, more cute, less perverted nightmare. The next film up on the list is Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. This film showcases an extraterrestrial clone of Godzilla called Space Godzilla coming down to Earth, kidnapping baby Godzilla and forcing Godzilla to team up with the humans to fight this new extraterrestrial foe. The last film of the Heisei era is Godzilla vs. Destroyer. This film serves as the culmination of the Heisei era and features the final appearance of Godzilla in this continuity. Godzilla faces his most powerful adversary, Destroyer, a demonic creature born from the Oxygen Destroyer, the weapon that killed the first Godzilla in 1954. As you've probably been able to gauge, this era isn't as complex as the Showa era. For a start, this has nearly half the film count at 7 as opposed to the 15 of the Showa era. In my opinion, this is the most approachable era due to having a lower film count, more consistent tone, characterization, and better special effects, whilst also having a more grounded and interesting story, which builds over time. So obviously with less films, I'm not going to be able to do a top 5 of the era. Instead, I was given a top 3 of the era, so you know which ones to check out. I think The Return of Godzilla is a fantastic place to start to wean yourself on the Japanese films. I kind of see it as a pseudo remake of the 54 film with more up-to-date special effects, more timely themes of the Cold War, and a better characterization of Godzilla as a force of nature. And being completely honest, I would just watch the next 2 films in the series, that being Godzilla vs. Biollante and Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, as they build off the previous film and make for a nice little trilogy in my opinion. And with Godzilla vs. Biollante, I think that's the perfect film to see the template of a Godzilla film. Whilst with Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, it's a fun, wacky sci-fi film with some great action and some interesting special effects. So now let's get into the Millennium era. So you may be thinking, you're going to do a basic rundown of each film and the era. Well, not exactly. See, this era doesn't follow the same structure as the other 2. Instead, each film here is more or less disconnected from the prior film, with the only connection being with the 1954 film. So I'm not going to do a era breakdown. Instead, I'm just going to give my top 3 selections of which film to check out. I think GMK would be a great place to not exactly start, but if you've watched other Godzilla films, I think it's a nice inversion of the general Godzilla plot. See, in this film, Godzilla takes the form of a vengeful spirit, whilst Mothra, King Ghidorah, and Baragon represent the Guardians of Japan. The 3 Guardian monsters unite to combat Godzilla's destructive rampage. And then the next 2 films I would recommend watching are actually sequels to each other, that being Godzilla Against Mechagodzilla and Tokyo SOS. This film introduces the concept of Kiryu, a mechanical version of Godzilla created by the Japanese government using the original 1954 Godzilla's bones. Kiryu is deployed to defend Japan from Godzilla's relentless attacks, whilst the sequel evolves into Kiryu gaining his own sentience and with the help of Mothra defeats Godzilla. I know some fans may disagree with my picks of why don't you pick Godzilla Final Wars? I don't really think that film's a good place to start. In fact, I think it's one of the worst places to start. The film marks the 50th anniversary of the franchise and acts as more of like a showcase of the franchise, and it's more so for the fans with like countless Easter eggs, references, that sort of thing. To me, it's kind of like if you start with Star Wars Episode 9 or Avengers Endgame. However, the thing is with the Millennium era, I don't think it's anywhere near as approachable as the other two eras. It acts as more of like a filmmaker's interpretation of the Godzilla franchise. I think this era should be checked out if you're educated enough about the franchise and have watched other films in the other eras, so you get a basic rundown of the general idea of Godzilla, and then you get to see different filmmakers' interpretation of the character. My general opinion of the Millennium era is also shared with the Re-era era. I don't think this is a good place to start. I think it's a good place to look if you know what the character is all about. And again, it's more about a different filmmaker's interpretation of Godzilla. But I'll give you the basic rundown of the era just in case. This era starts with Shin Godzilla, a kind of a remake of the original 1954 film with more up to date, with it heavily being based on the 2011 Japanese earthquakes and tsunami. The next bunch of films is the anime trilogy. I don't think these films are particularly good. However, they're interesting enough, I guess. So that's why you're up against 36 films across nearly 70 years of history. It's pretty daunting, I know, but you don't have to view it in any particular way. I kind of see the Godzilla franchise as a pick and choose your own movie history thing, if that makes sense. You don't have to pick out certain eras and just binge on all of them. I think the franchise works best if you just pick and choose which films look the most interesting to you. So what about if you just want to watch films that kind of appeal to your tastes? Well, it's kind of difficult. You see, kaiju are quite niche in my opinion, so they don't exactly fit into different categories, but I'll try and help out with that. If you're a fan of horror films, I think checking out The Return of Godzilla, Shin Godzilla and GMK could be interesting places to start due to the fact that they are a bit more horror than the other films in the series. If you're a particular fan of sci-fi, I think checking out films like Godzilla vs King Ghidorah, Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla 2 and Godzilla vs Space Godzilla could be great places to start due to the more sci-fi elements of those films. Or if you just want a good movie to watch as a whole, I'd highly recommend the original Godzilla 1954, King Kong vs Godzilla, and Godzilla vs Biollante, due to the fact that these films are quite entertaining and also very approachable films to a newcomer of the series. But as I said earlier in the video, I think the MonsterVerse is the best place to start. These films are definitely the most approachable Godzilla films due to the fact they're being made in the West and also incorporate a lot of the Japanese films elements quite well, and also just fun films in my opinion. Another thing that you need to be wary of when you watch Godzilla films is the different cuts of different films. You see, with some of the films, notably 54, King Kong vs Godzilla and The Return of Godzilla, these films have Americanized cuts which change around some of the scenes and make it more palatable for a Western audience. You have some fans who completely swear by the original cuts of these films. However, I don't think there's any harm in checking out these versions of the films. In fact, I think they're more approachable than their Japanese counterparts due to the fact they're more palatable for a Western audience, due to the fact they're shorter for a start. Now, how about actually watching the films? You see, that's the issue. A lot of the films, at least where I am, aren't really that accessible, so it's more of like a pick and choose which films you can watch. In my personal experience, I just end up pirating some of the films. However, I would highly recommend seeing any sort of physical version you possibly can, or buying it on some sort of streaming service. It gives money to the original creators and isn't illegal for a start. Right, so to end off this quite lengthy video, I'm going to give a basic top 5 of what films I think you should watch of any of the films. At number 5, I have Godzilla vs Mothra. I think this film is a good place to start if you want to know who Mothra is, and also is a fun watch with nice special effects. And then comes in Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla, an introduction to Mechagodzilla as a character, fun sci-fi action, kind of goofy but also sincere and genuine. Then I'd say Godzilla vs Biollante due to the fact it acts as the kind of the perfect template of the standard Godzilla formula whilst having an interesting villain, topical themes, and great special effects. I feel like I'm focusing too much on special effects, like which ones to watch, but it's a kaiju film, you're mainly in it for the monster action, so I think how the film looks visually is the most important aspect. aspect of these films. Anyway, back to the list. I'd say the next film you should watch is King Kong vs Godzilla, the perfect Godzilla Showa film. It's a fun, brisk watch with a lovable monster in King Kong, Godzilla being at his most spiteful and vindictive, goofy human characters, whilst also having a nice, easy, understandable plot. And then, of course, I think the film that you should definitely check out is the original Godzilla 1954, the film which started it all. Yeah, sure, I know it's a bit dated, but you have to kind of like give it its own respect due to the fact it was the franchise's beginning. So yeah, that's my basic rundown of the Godzilla franchise. I know I probably didn't explain it too well, but if you have any questions, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. I'd be happy to try and help you where I can. But also, I just recommend just going for it. It's the most fun when you just jump into the franchise and don't really know what to expect. I hope this has been a useful guide and just a fun watch as a whole. Have a great day, guys, and I'll see you around.